Everybody, we're the good doctors of Abbey Research on our post-election day coverage of Native American Heritage Month. Which, if you know us, you know we do this a lot. We like to take advantage of these designated months and weeks to highlight important stories. Sometimes we do ones like this that are nationally recognized. Sometimes we make up our own. If you saw our Indian Culture Month coverage last month, in the month of October. But for Native American Heritage Month, we are super excited that the organization Women Make Movies has put together a Native American Heritage Month virtual film festival highlighting 4 films made by women about Indigenous women, about Indigenous women. So we signed up for the free viewings. We've watched them and we're going to cover them for the next 4 weeks. Really diverse topics and stories about the diversity that is Indigenous communities. I think they only talked about the United States. They did. Here on the land that is the United States. So we're really excited. Up first is Without a Whisper, or Ganungkwe, as it is in hot language, Mohawk language, that's it, which was made in 2020. It's about half an hour long, and a lot of it we knew already from our suffrage coverage earlier in the year. Effectively, it tells the story of the origin of a lot of ideas for the women's rights movement coming from women in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Iroquois Confederacy, which is in now modern day New York. And kind of their struggle to get recognition that women's rights really began with Indigenous women. It doesn't do as great a job telling that story. We didn't struggle with it because we knew a lot of it, but if you're new to this story, you might have to do some Googling. But it follows Louise Hearn, and I can't say your middle name. I love you, Louise, but I'm not even going to try and butcher it, who's the Mohawk clan mother for the Bear Clan, and her relationship with Dr. Sally Rush Wagner, who is a baller of a women's historian. What was she, like the first?
One of the first women to get a PhD in gender studies in
women's studies, yeah. And Sally just decided she didn't know a whole lot about Indigenous women and their role in this, and educated herself, and has now become one of the public speakers saying, hey, white women didn't invent suffrage and women's rights. So that's the basis of the story. It just kind of follows this indiscriminate period. They bring up a lot of other things that happen to Indigenous peoples on this land, which is a bit of a problem. But Dr. Donnelly, thoughts, comments, questions, concerns?
I mean, religious liberty hat. They throw around some creation myth stuff that is incredibly important to understanding how we view human relationships with Earth and human relationships within each other. And they just said it as 2 things that everybody should know. And I am concerned that people don't actually know. Also, like they talk about the creation myth, and they don't really talk about Judeo-Christianity even as an entity. They don't talk about the Puritans and kind of what creation myth and version of the creation myth they brought over.
There were some missing pieces, but
and I just found myself
too.
Like, there was a couple frustrating parts for me in that it could have been, so it was 28 minutes, and I either wanted it to be 15 or I wanted it to be a full hour.
Yeah.
And if they could have cut out some of the stuff that they tried to do, I wonder, and this is in no way a slight, but if this is a filmmaker early in her career. Because when I was first teaching, the hardest thing for me was to not shove everything into a lecture.
Yeah.
Because you're like, I have all this knowledge and I want to share it with you, and you are so excited. But instead of telling one story, she told a couple.
Yeah.
And I wish she would have just stuck with Dr. Wagner and Louise's relationship, because that was so powerful, and I would have loved to see more about that.
Yeah.
And But I learned, for instance, there was not domestic violence in the Haudenosaunee because when you were a dude who overstayed your welcome, your things were placed outside your house. So all of us who have thrown boyfriend's belongings out of our house, we actually have like precedent for that.
We can thank the women of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy for that idea. And I think I agree with you. Louise and Sally's relationship was the most powerful. And Louise was such a powerful narrator.
Yes.
In the way that she is taking up the mantle of building up the women in her clan and in her tribe.
Yep.
And, kind of reclaiming this heritage of creation. And that, our names, she said, our names, our clan, our nation are carried by the mothers.
Yep.
And like, that was so, it's just like amazing to see. And the way she was so salty towards the colonists, but she was just like, imagine if that was in your constitution, lol, it's not. And this contrast between, white women being politically dead for most of America's existence until suffrage, and contrasting it with Indigenous women, and then how that flipped after suffrage.
Well, and even before suffrage, how they started flipping it with the industrial schools, which they touched on and then didn't do anything with. And that was, again, I understand the impact, especially in the history of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which is so tied to the history of the United States. I would say I sit on Lenape Confederacy land, and I know that is also quite tied to the founders and to the relationships and kind of all of that. And so I've read not as much as I should about the Lenape, but every time I read something about it, a conversation about relationships with founding fathers is in there somehow.
Yeah.
And so it sounds to me like the Haudenosaunee are quite like that with the founders of the women's rights movement in particular.
Yeah.
So it's so rich and so beautiful. And you want to tell every single story of how then these people got completely screwed because they did.
Because they did.
I especially because none of us know enough about this.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I liked that. I liked also the conversation about imagination that happened within this. That I wish we could have explored a little bit further. That the real problem was that Europeans suffer from a lack of imagination.
Yeah, and that the settlers couldn't imagine why you would want to consult a woman about a political issue, and white women needed to be shown that there was a different way to structure your society and a different way to live. And the horrifying part of that story is white women saw that, said, yeah, that's a great idea, thanks for that, and then spent the next century assimilating and erasing the Indigenous foremothers that had given them this idea. So I think for me, it was just too big of a story to tell in 27 minutes. But it comes across so passionately. I agree with you. Like, it feels like this person needed to mention all of these things. And I can totally understand that need, but it left it a bit scattered. But if you want to continue.
Yep, indeed. I was hoping you were going to go get the book.
I have the books behind me. So I have one book by our friend Sally Rush Wagner, Sisters in Spirit, about the Haudenosaunee women and the early feminists. And then the book that she was signing at the end, the women's suffrage movement, that for the first time ever tells the story of women's suffrage not starting with the white ladies. So pick up those books where you can get them. Bless Penguin Classics for wanting to tell that story and giving Sally Rush the platform to correct the historical record.
And And we'll be covering that on Abby Research Reads, one of our other series, within the next several weeks. So keep an eye on our YouTube channel for our review of that particular literature. We are making our way through the absolute deluge of suffrage stuff that was published this year.
I have so many suffrage books over here, y'all. I haven't even read.
So we're getting there. We're getting there.
We promise we will talk more about it. And we will talk more about Indigenous women's stories as we continue our Native American Heritage Month coverage. So look out for next week's film about Paulette Jordan, a Indigenous politician. And we will talk to you guys then.
Bye.